goes here. I know last time I took you to when we moved congregations in the 70s. The 70s were pretty busy for me. I forgot something, so I hope you don't mind if I go backwards a bit. But first, a little bit about my parents. Mom and Dad met in Brooklyn, Bethel in the late 50s. I found out recently that Dad was the overseer for the family home at the time. It was in the 124 building on Columbia Heights in Brooklyn, New York. Because of my dad's status, he and one other brother lived in the penthouse. His view looked across to Manhattan, and he had a direct view to the Statue of Liberty. I never knew that before. I know you might not believe me, but my dad is really humble. He always said, when you become a servant in the congregation, that is exactly what you are. You serve your congregation. You're stepping down to serve them. Well, I don't think that included the 21-year-olds at the time. I guess because Dad is in his mid-80s now, he wants to share parts of his story with us. Needless to say, I was flabbergasted when he told me. Mom and Dad dated for 5 years. Back then, you had to have been in Bethel 14 years, or the two had to serve a total of 14 years. I would love to see those rules in the Bible. My parents dated for just over 5 years and were 2 years short of hitting the 14-year mark, but they just didn't want to wait any longer. So they both went to Nathan Knorr to ask his permission to leave to get married. Knorr was the faithful slave at that time. Think about this. Adults needing permission to get married. That's pretty ridiculous. Well, Knorr told them that if my parents left to get married, they would not be able to come back to Bethel as a married couple, which is crazy to me because Knorr was married at the time. Couldn't he have had any understanding of how long my parents had already waited? Nope. Basically, Knorr was telling my parents that if they didn't comply to his rules, they couldn't stay at his house. Dad told me that he talked to the organization's lead counsel, Hayden Covington, for advice. You need to look him up. He was the one who won a lot of the cases at the Supreme Court on behalf of the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society. Also, Hayden Covington and Nathan Knorr didn't get along very well. Well, Hayden told my dad to leave, get married, and start his life with his new wife. Nothing about having to serve someplace, just enjoy his life as a married couple. My dad really did admire Hayden. Knorr, on the other hand, told my parents since they couldn't come back to Bethel as a married couple, they should go into the circuit work and eventually the district work. That was when we had district overseers. Those were done away with in 2014. Well, about 2 months after they were married, they found out Mom was pregnant with me. I have since been known as the circuit breaker. Before I go on, I want to share some things that I didn't in my last video, like I said. Like I told you, the 70s were very busy for me. When we were still in the Theater Kingdom Hall, Mom and Dad had a Volkswagen Bug. If you have ever looked inside of the back of a Bug, you know how small the back is. Mom was auxiliary pioneering, and to auxiliary pioneer, you had to put a minimum of 60 hours in back then. At the time, there were only 2 of us kids. Now, you have to remember, back then, seat belts and car seats weren't required. Mom took the back seat of the Bug out and put something soft down for us. I can't remember what it was. She would make some sandwiches and pack some snacks for us. We even got to play with toys out in service back there. I don't remember a lot, but I do remember my sibling and I playing in the back seat and feeling that we had plenty of room. So that shows just how little and young we were. Which reminds me, I could only have been around 4, maybe 5, I don't know. I was playing with these long green toys. I can't remember what they were called, but they were long. Well, I had one in my hand, and while running, I tripped, and I hit the back of my throat with one. No worries, I was fine, but I cried enough I got to stay home from meeting, and I was so happy about that. Isn't that awful? That a young child is glad she hurt her throat so she didn't have to go to the meeting. The organization completely takes a child's youth away, doesn't it? Like I shared in the last video, when I was around 5, a lot of things happened. I gave my first talk with stick people on index cards. The theater our congregation used as a kingdom hall was remodeled, and I heard my very first announcement of someone being disfellowshipped. That same year, I was asked to lead the class in saluting the flag. I had to say no and sit down. We weren't supposed to stand during the flag salute, so we would sit while the class was saluting the flag. That really embarrassed me. That was a hard one to explain away. All the kids were asking me why I couldn't lead them in the flag salute and why I couldn't salute the flag, and I couldn't answer because I didn't really understand why. Do they still sit for the flag salute? The organization made a video recently with the little girl standing. If that's the case, I'm happy for the kids now, but I'm extremely mad at the men at the top for humiliating me in front of the class by making me sit down during the flag salute. I was just a little kid. Why would they expect that from kids? I had to ask Mom and Dad if I could make paper snowflakes because it was around Christmas time. I was so jealous hearing about everything my friends got for Christmas. My mom and dad would try to make up for it. On their anniversary every year, they would buy us simple presents and hide them in the front room for us. Us kids would wake up to balloons and scram around the house to look for our presents. Mom and Dad made it really special. I really appreciate my parents doing that because they really didn't have to for us. My Situ, my grandma, finally listened to her mom and started to study with someone. They showed her the name Jehovah, and because of that, she knew if they knew God's name, they would be able to explain the rest of the Bible. She brought my Jadu, my grandpa, to one of her studies so the Bible student could show and explain the scriptures to him. And as they say, the rest is history. I'll go into more about how all of my family came into the organization. Situ had 9 siblings and my Jiddu had 11 siblings, but that's for later. Dad told me he still remembers the smell of the Christmas tree. I can tell my dad has fond memories of Christmas because he still remembers it, and he's in his mid-80s. During my research, I found out that witnesses used to celebrate Christmas, but Rutherford wanted to separate the Bible students, which is what Jehovah's Witnesses were called before Rutherford renamed them. Rutherford wanted to separate those who left the organization because of him from those that wanted to cling to Russell's teachings. So one of the things he did in order to do that was to make Christmas a major no-no. Nice, huh? So thanks for that, Rutherford. There's something else that happened to me around that time. My great uncle started to abuse me sexually. I told my parents, but you see, the organization was spouting that children lie about that to get someone in trouble. So when I told my mom and dad, I think they believed me, but because of what they were hearing from the organization, I don't know if they truly understood the significance. Plus, my uncle vehemently denied it. I remember the arguments and yelling the family was doing after I told my parents. They eventually started bringing me around him again. The organization somehow was able to desensitize my parents to what their daughter had been through. And they started to bring me around my great uncle again at the family gatherings. I think he felt emboldened because nothing was done about anything the first time. So he continued to abuse me, and by this point, I was afraid of saying anything. I didn't think anyone would believe me, and I didn't want my family to fight like the last time. So every time I saw him, he would get me in a room by asking me to get something. Finally, by 14, I got the courage to tell him I would scream if he ever touched me again. He never abused me after that. As I became an adult, I wanted to turn him in. But as witnesses, we weren't supposed to do that because it brought reproach upon Jehovah. Now, go figure that one out. When you think about this, I could have actually been disfellowshipped for turning him in as an abuser. I wasn't able to go to a therapist to help me deal with what happened because therapists were looked down on. We were told that a therapist would say things that could turn us away from Jehovah. And by talking about something like this outside of the organization, we could bring reproach upon Jehovah's name. Please, make that make sense to me. That's why child sexual abuse became rampant in the organization. Abusers felt emboldened because they were never turned into the authorities. That's the cause of all the child sexual abuse lawsuits that have happened over the last 20 years, where millions and millions and millions of dollars have been spent in attorney fees and settlement. I want the organization to be sued, but sadly, the witnesses end up paying for the lawsuits and settlements through our donations. Nice, huh? The organization allowed child sexual abuse to become rampant, and the victims and their families ended up paying for any lawsuits through the donations they had made, and they were never allowed to be able to expose it. When I was in 4th grade, I was in the same class as a boy in my hall, and he was so embarrassing to me. He made sure everyone in the class knew we were witnesses and could be no part of anything. One time, the class had a holiday party. He grabbed me and announced, "We don't celebrate holidays or birthdays," to the entire class. I was so embarrassed. I usually just slipped out of the classroom and went to the library. But no, he wanted us to make a public stand to show our faith. So we sat in the hall outside of the classroom to show we took a stand for Jehovah. He would also preach to the kids and bring magazines to class to hand out. It's funny, even though I fully believed and tried my best to be faithful, I absolutely hated telling my friends at school that I was a witness. I hated going out in service and having any of my friends come to the door. I was really embarrassed when someone I knew from school came to the door. Are all kids like that? Or was that just me? It was really hard not being able to hang out with any of my friends from school. So thank you, Watchtower, for making me feel so isolated as a kid. Anyhow, back to moving halls when I was 10. In the last chapter, I told you about the theater kingdom hall we had and how Dad was asked to move to help start a new congregation when I was 9 or 10. I had very mixed feelings about that. I was excited about the adventure of going to a new hall, but I was sad I was losing every friend I had ever known. For the first year or two, I didn't have anyone my age in the new hall to hang out with, like in my old hall. Mom and Dad really tried to keep me in touch with all of my friends from our previous hall that were across town. Sometimes it would take us 25 minutes to go to their house for Mom and Dad to drop me off. After a while, I think it got to be too much for Mom and Dad to continue doing that. And eventually, all those friendships started to fizzle out. But there was one friend I tried my very best to stay in touch with. My best friend from the theater kingdom hall. But she eventually got in trouble, and even that friendship had to end. I remember walking into the new kingdom hall for the very first time. It was so small compared to the old theater kingdom hall. Instead of comfy cushions on the chairs, the new chairs were all wood. That's it. Wood seats and wood backs. The chairs folded like the old Central Kingdom Hall, but unlike being hit by a cushion when you got up, in the new Kingdom Hall, you got smacked by wood. The stage also only had 2 steps to climb up on, instead of the 5 at the other hall. Well, after I checked the main hall and second school out, I went on back to the bathroom. The bathroom was a lot bigger than it was at the Theater Kingdom Hall. Instead of 1 stall and a small sink, we now had 2 smalls and a big sink. Besides the wood chairs, I liked the new hall. It was at this Kingdom Hall where I start to remember the written reviews, questions about what we had been taught. We got those tests at the end of April, August, and December. They would hand the tests out along with these wooden clipboards for people to use to write on. I remember the brothers carrying all those boards up and down the aisle, handing them out down the rows of seats, and then picking them up after the test was done. Well, these tests would be then turned in when the time was up to be graded. Then later on, we handed the test to the person next to us to be graded. I was always petrified that I got the answer wrong, and it would look like I wasn't really listening. Eventually, we ended up grading our own tests. At first, the brother on stage would read out the answers to grade the papers, and later, the questions were read and we would answer them from the audience. While everyone was taking the test, it would get really quiet, even more so than during the meetings. Maybe that was just me, I don't know. Around that time, we started to grade our own reviews. We also started getting the questions in advance to study them. That made the tests a breeze. I would research to get the answers and then memorize them so it looked like I was really paying attention. Please correct me in the comments if my memory isn't serving me correctly about any of that. It was around this time that the organization had everyone write to the Malawi government because of the persecution that was happening to our brothers and sisters there. My parents had all of the adults in the congregation that wanted to write the letters come over so they could all write the letters together. I was too young to be able to write the letters, but I was able to fold the letters, put them in the envelope, and then put a stamp on the envelope. They gave me a sponge with water to be able to lick the envelopes and stamps. Back then, there was no self-adhesive. I hated the taste, but at least I got to be doing something with the adults. I was pretty proud of myself to be able to help out. During my research, I found that it was the organization's fault that those brothers and sisters were being persecuted in Malawi.
Now, Jehovah's Witnesses are taught that it's a sin to be involved in any way with politics. They're also taught that it's just as great a sin to have anything to do with the military. But we have 2 situations, one in a country in Africa, Malawi, and another in Mexico, where 2 opposite rulings were allowed to stay in effect at the same time, and it's almost unbelievable. In Mexico, every young man is expected to fulfill 1 year of military service. He receives what's called a cartilla, a certificate. The witnesses customarily and regularly would bribe a military official to fill out this card, stating that they had completed their military instruction and that they were now in the first reserves of the Army. Why were they doing this? They gave me copies of letters from the Watchtower Society's headquarters in New York, stating that this was purely a matter for individual conscience, and that if the person felt he could do this, pay a bribe to a military official, get this card saying he had completed his military training, was now a member of the first reserves, this was up to him.
Pretty disgusting, isn't it? Also around that time, there was this hype about 1975. All the adults were talking about it. You heard about it at all the meetings. I remember walking around the Kingdom Hall saying, 6,000 years of man's existence, 6,000 years of man's existence. I had no idea how that had anything to do with 1975. I later found out that was just another failed prediction the organization had made. In the last video, I told you how we found out that my Situ had lung cancer when I was around 10 or 11. My Situ and Jitu, my grandparents, were asked to move to the new hall as well with our family to help with the new congregation. About 5 months into when we moved to the new hall, I found out just how sick my Situ was getting. Maybe she had been getting sick sooner and my parents tried to hide it from me. I don't know. But my Situ started to miss a lot of meetings, which was weird to me because she never missed meetings. I honestly remember thinking my Situ wasn't being as faithful as she always had been. Isn't that sad the organization made me feel that way about my Situ? It didn't matter to me because my Situ could do no wrong in my eyes. I don't know if it was because we were so new to the congregation, but it seemed no one cared about my Situ. She had to move in with us because my mom needed to take care of her. I remember ones from our other congregation coming to visit her, but I don't remember anyone from our new congregation coming to see her or even help Mom with any meals. But we had a revolving door of family from both sides of the family coming to see my Situ, and it didn't matter to Mom and Dad if they were witnesses or not. Associating with our worldly family wasn't as frowned down upon like it is now. And that's due to Frederick Franz in the 80s. But that's for later. My Situ died when I was almost 12. Her memorial was held at the old Theater Kingdom Hall. There were so many there that they had to set up chairs in the lobby that was right behind the main chairs. My Jitu and Situ were pillars in the area. Their door was like a revolving door. People were always coming and going to visit them or ask Jitu for advice. They had lived in the area since the late 30s, so they basically knew everyone. I remember after she died, no one in the congregation talked to me about her. It's like they just forgot about her. Maybe it was because she had missed so many meetings, but she was sick. I remember how much that hurt me. My Jitu lived on the way to the Kingdom Hall, so we would pick him up on our way to the Kingdom Hall after Situ died. I remember after the meetings we would go to his house because he would buy us Neapolitan or chocolate ice cream, and I always loved the smell of their house. When I was around 11, we started to build our assembly hall. Dad was in charge of the landscaping. My dad was known for his landscaping skills. The lot the assembly was built on was just a huge lot with no trees or anything. By the time the assembly hall was done, all the landscaping was done. Everyone was talking about just how beautiful it all turned out. Side note here. Dad told me an interesting story. Every year, the grounds needed to be taken care of and pruned. Instead of having to do everything himself, which was a major undertaking every weekend of the summer, Dad and a couple of other brothers that worked on the grounds thought of an idea to hopefully encourage others to help maintain the assembly grounds. They would teach the brothers and sisters different skills depending on what they wanted to learn, and maintain the grounds at the same time. So they had the local congregations announce that those classes would be held every weekend throughout the summer. I remember the brothers and sisters being worried they were going to do a hack job. Dad would tell them, "Shrubs and trees are like Jehovah, very forgiving." He said there was nothing that wouldn't grow back if someone gave a shrub or something a bad haircut. Everyone would laugh, and I could tell it put them at ease. I remember getting to go around and show someone how to do something if they had a question. Dad had taught me how to prune some, so I was able to answer some of their questions. Dad helped with the ones I couldn't answer. Somehow, my dad made working fun. I'm not sure why, but my dad and the other brothers felt they needed to get permission to have those classes from the men in New York. Go figure that one out. Well, they wrote back east to the society, which is what the organization was called back then. The brothers wrote back to make sure the classes were okay to conduct. About 3 months later, the organization came back and told them not to have those classes. But my dad and the other brothers had figured it wouldn't hurt to have the classes until they had heard back from the society. By the time my dad and the other brothers got the letter telling them they couldn't have those classes, Dad had already given around 12 classes. So every year, he had plenty of other people that would come and do the landscaping with him or with others, so that he didn't have to spend every weekend in the summer pruning the assembly hall grounds by himself, or maybe with another brother or two. Before the brothers got the kibosh on the classes, Dad was able to teach hundreds of people how to prune. I guess Jehovah was directing my dad, and not the men in New York. Building our assembly hall was nothing like it is today. There was no RBC, LDC, or whatever alphabet they are using now. You didn't have to go to any classes. You didn't have to buy all the protection gear or get assigned to do anything. You just showed up and helped. Anyone that showed up was put to work. I was too young to help with the construction, but I was perfect to go around and hand out tang to anyone who was thirsty. What's funny is, when I was going around handing out my tang, I would hear all these grunts and cussing because someone dropped something or someone completely messed up on their assigned job. They would see me and all of a sudden everything was happy and perfect. I remember thinking, I might be a kid, but I'm not stupid. I didn't care what they said. I just wanted to hand out my tang. I know it might be safer now with all of the rules and the regulations. I get that. But it's not nearly as fun either. A funny story. There was a drive-in theater behind the assembly lot. Anyone who acted as a security at night got to watch the movies. There was no sound, but if they got it just right, they could listen to the movie on their FM radio. If they couldn't, they still enjoyed watching the movie. During security one time, my husband remembers watching a movie that starred Teresa Graves. Teresa was first on an adult-themed comedy show called Rowan, I can't say that word, and Martin's Laughin'. You're just going to have to YouTube that show. Teresa was one of the suck it to me girls. Yep, she was on TV dancing in her bikini. After Laughin', she became a movie star. She starred in the ABC crime drama series Get Christy Love, where she was a sexy undercover police detective. She was also in movies. She was in a movie called Old Dracula, where she played a very, very sexy role. Well, my husband and another guy working security one night went to see what movie was playing. The movie playing was Old Dracula, starring Teresa Graves. My husband said he saw a lot of cleavage and that she was incredibly sexy. The other brother on security said while they were watching the movie, My sister Graves. While filming Old Dracula, I guess she was studying. She came into the organization and was baptized as one of Jehovah's Witnesses in 1974. I remember when she came to town one time. Dad got a large room someplace. I can't remember exactly where it was at, but it was pretty large and had a huge window that looked over the valley. Dad had invited anyone from all over the place to meet our sister Teresa Graves. A lot of people showed up. It seems even witnesses aren't immune to being starstruck. I had never watched her show or saw any of her movies, so I wasn't really as impressed as everyone else. Even back then, celebrities got away with doing things us regular people can't. Sometimes I felt like I could actually feel the Holy Spirit guiding the occasion. Well, I had that fuzzy feeling at this get-together, so I really did enjoy it. Anyhow, back to building the assembly hall. I was too young, again, to actually help out with construction. Instead, I was given a couple of very important jobs. One of my jobs was to take tang around to anyone who was thirsty. Right next to the assembly hall, we were building this duplex for the district and overseers to live in while they were serving in the area. The district overseer position that oversaw all the circuit overseers was done away with in 2014. Circuit overseers were then given the responsibility to take care of any problems in their circuit and approve any appointments of ministerial servants or elders. My other job was peeling potatoes. Before the duplex was finished, I remember peeling potatoes with the sisters for lunch that afternoon. We were peeling potatoes in what was going to be one of the front rooms. I remember the adults gossiping while we were peeling the potatoes. I absolutely loved the stories they were telling too. They talked about service and assemblies and what it was like in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. It absolutely fascinated me. The duplex nearest the assembly hall was completed first. After that part was complete, us kids were never allowed to go near that building again. Around that time, the very first two-day Kingdom Hall in our area was built. We would actually build a Kingdom Hall from the floor up over a weekend. The prep work, like the foundation, was already done, but nothing else. I remember while we were building, Dad taking me aside and up a small hill. He had me look down to the Kingdom Hall site. There had to have been at least 200 or 300 people that showed up. Dad said, who else but Jehovah's people could accomplish something like this? I got that fuzzy feeling again. The sisters would get together under a big tent and cook breakfast, lunch, and dinner for everyone working there. That was a lot of fun, cooking in those outdoor kitchens they set up. It was a lot more fun than cooking your assigned dish at home now and bringing it to the RBC or LBC building site. The organization has taken fun out of everything over the decades. I know I keep saying that, but they really have. One time, my dad had part of the photo drama of creation played instead of a public talk one Sunday. It was the colored presentation that Russell had made in 1912. I wish I could remember how my dad got that. Dad told me Jehovah was behind it because they used color way before color became the norm. Dad had built that photo drama up to me so much, I watched it thinking, wow, Jehovah was so far ahead of that time. I had that fuzzy feeling going on again. Our small hall was packed to the brim to come see it. The only other time it was packed like that was during Memorial. The organization used to have brothers and sisters play an orchestra during the assemblies for the kingdom songs. Congregations that were big enough would have a piano where a sister or a brother would play so we could follow along as we sang. Other halls actually had an organ player. Well, our hall was way too small for any of that. Instead, we had a brother who was of the anointed start us off by singing. His name was Norman. I guess Norman was in the opera or something because he sang weird to me. It was around 11 or 12 when I really started noticing boys at school. I knew I wasn't supposed to, so I felt guilty I had these feelings, but I couldn't stop them. There was a talk given about washing your mind of thoughts you shouldn't have. After that talk, I would beg Jehovah to make me stop noticing and liking the boys. I would ask him to wash my mind of those thoughts. I was just a kid with normal feelings. Watchtower, why did you make me as a kid feel guilty for the feelings God gave me? When I was 12, I graduated middle school. There was a dance right after school one day for the graduates, about a week before we graduated. I wanted to go so bad, so I went. I felt guilty the entire time, but it was also exciting. I'd never hung out with any of my friends after school. By the time I walked home from school, I had really worked myself up. I just knew Jehovah had made known what I did to Mom and Dad. But when I got home, they didn't say anything, so I never offered anything. What a rebel I was. Well, that brings me to my teens. High school, friends, parties, parts on the district assembly, going to an international assembly when I was 13, my first boyfriend, and our district overseer, Brother Baxter, in his closing prayer asking Jehovah to help us young ones not defile ourselves by touching ourselves inappropriately. At every assembly. Maybe he got that out of that humiliating chapter in the youth book. When I was almost 13, we had a family with 3 girls finally move into our hall. My sister and I became instant best friends with them. We got into mischief and had a lot of fun. That is, until they started getting in trouble. So we had to start limiting our association with them. But you're going to have to come back for all of that. If you got this far in the video, thank you. I hope you keep coming back for more stories. Please, take care of yourselves. You stay strong. You don't let those men in New York win. Thanks for watching. Rose out.
And also, the governing body is neither inspired nor infallible, and so it can err in doctrinal matters or in organizational direction. Well, knowing this, then, we are not embarrassed about adjustments that are made, nor is an apology needed for not getting it exactly right previously. We understand.